Welcome to the Counting and Clapping tutorial series created by the junior high band teachers of the Gilbert Unified School District in Gilbert, Arizona. Counting and Clapping number 1, Conventions. At the end of this tutorial, you should understand the conventions for counting and clapping notes and the conventions for counting and clapping rests. To be successful, you need to already understand the concepts taught in these earlier tutorials, all rhythm tree tutorials, and basic time signatures and beats. Conventions is another word for rules, so we're going to go over the rules for counting notes. Write the counting directly under the notes. So in the first measure of this example, we have 4 quarter notes. So we want to put the numbers directly underneath the notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to make sure to line up the numbers with their notes. In the next measure, we have 2 half notes. So on the first half note, we need to line up 1, 2, and the second half note needs to start with 3 and go to 4. The next measure has a dotted half note where 3 counts. So 1, 2, 3 goes under the dotted half note and the 4 goes right under the quarter note. The last measure is a whole note, so we make sure the 1 lines right up with the beginning of the note and we have all 4 numbers. Make sure to start every full measure or bar with the number 1. Notice how that happens in each measure. Check the top number of the time signature for the correct number of beats. In this case, the top number is a 4, so every measure has to have 4 beats in it. Now let's explore the conventions or rules for counting rests. Write the counting directly under the rests. We have 4 quarter rests. Each gets their own number. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure to line up the numbers with their rests. We have a half rest, 1, 2, and then another half rest, 3, 4, with the numbers lined up perfectly underneath. Then we have a whole rest with all 4 numbers underneath, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like with the notes, start every full bar or measure with the number 1. And always check the top number of the time signature for the correct number of beats. In this case, it's a 4, so every measure has to have 4 beats. Now that we know the conventions or rules, let's look at some of the common mistakes that we teachers tend to see. A lot of times we will see that you write the note value instead of the counting under the notes. For instance, the first measure has 4 quarter notes. Each quarter note is worth 1 count, but it would be a mistake to show 1, 1, 1, 1 and tell us the value of the note instead of the counting. The same thing in the second measure, which is a half note worth 2 counts. We don't want to see it start with a 2 and just tell us the amount. If we keep going with this trend, we would see a 3 and a 1 and a 4 for the whole note. Now those are the correct values, but it's not the correct counting. Another mistake we see is that the number of beats does not match the time signature. For instance, if we saw in the first measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be a mistake because our top number of our time signature says that every measure can only have 4 counts and we're showing 5. Another common mistake is that the counting does not line up with the notes. If we crunch all the numbers together, 1, 2, 3, 4, all under one note, and we don't show anything under the next note, then we as teachers think that you think that the first note in that measure should have 4 counts. Another common mistake is that every full bar or measure does not start with the number 1. So it would be a mistake to make the next measure 5, 6, 7, 8 because it doesn't start with the number 1. The last of the most common mistakes is that when you write the numbers under the notes, that the numbers are not directly under the notes. Sometimes we'll see something that might look like this, all over the place. Let's take a look at the correct way to put the counting under these measures. In the first measure, we have 4 quarter notes. Each gets their own number and count. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the next measure, the first half note gets the numbers 1, 2 directly under it and lined up. The next half note gets the next 2 numbers, 3, 4, directly lined up under the note. The dotted half note gets 1, 2, 3, and the quarter note gets a 4. And finally, the last note, the whole note, takes up a whole measure and gets 4 counts. Now that we know the conventions or rules for how to count the notes, let's look at the rules that we want to follow in class for how to clap them and count them out loud at the same time. We want you to count out loud, but only clap at the start of a note. So in the first measure, we have 4 separate notes. You're going to clap 4 times. In the second measure, we have 2 notes worth 2 counts each. You're only going to clap at the start of each of those notes. In the third measure, we have 2 notes, a 3-count note and a 1-count note. So you're only going to clap twice, once at the beginning of each note. And in the last measure, it's 4 counts long, but it only gets 1 clap at the beginning of it. In these tutorials, as a visual aid for you, underlined numbers show you when to clap. But they're not normally underlined when writing in the counting, and we wouldn't expect you to underline them on any sort of a quiz or worksheet. Notice the underlining 1, 2, 3, 4 because we would clap on each of those numbers. In the next measure, we'd clap on the 1 and the 3. In the third measure, we clap on count 1, then count 4 would be another clap. In the last measure, we would clap on count 1 and continue to count out loud 2, 3, and 4. We're going to start longer notes with a clap and pulse the rest of the numbers with your hands together while you count out loud. So counts 1 and 2 here, you would clap on count 1, keep your hands together, and then say 2. On this half note, you would clap on count 3, keep your hands together, and say 4. On this 3-count note, you would clap on count 1, keep your hands together, and continue counting out loud for counts 2 and 3. Finally, on this whole note, you would clap on count 1, keep your hands together, and continue to count 2, 3, and 4. Here's a video of the correct way to clap and count this example.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now let's take a look at the conventions for how to clap and count rests. The first thing we need to know is that rests are silent. So we count out loud without clapping. In the first measure, we have 4 quarter rests. So we would still say out loud 1, 2, 3, 4, but we don't clap. In the second measure, we have 2 half rests. So on the first half rest, we count out loud 1, 2 without clapping, and then we count 3, 4 without clapping. The last measure is a whole rest, so we would count out loud 1, 2, 3, 4 without clapping. So what do we do with our hands while we're counting out loud? We pulse the numbers with our hands apart and count out loud. Here's a short video of the correct way to clap or not clap and count these rests.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
This tutorial showed the conventions or basic rules for counting and clapping notes and rests. Using these conventions, other tutorials in this series will focus on clapping and counting various rhythm patterns.